My younger brother texted, "Don't come to the barbecue," until my brother and wife step into my office. That single message, cold and final on the screen, can unravel a lifetime of loyalties. When the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally suddenly shut a door in your face, the silence that follows is the loudest sound you will ever hear. If you know the sting of being the family outcast, the one they laugh at instead of lift up, then you understand the story I'm about to tell. Stay with me, because the journey from that text to the truth changed everything I thought I knew about family. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a moment of this deeply personal story. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 68 years old. The story I'm sharing with you today is one from my own life, a chapter filled with betrayal, hard truths, and the painful cost of finding my own strength. It's a story I've held close for a long time, but it's time to let it out. The chime of my phone was an innocuous sound, one I usually associated with a recipe for my sister, or a photo of my niece's new baby. That Friday evening, I was in my element, surrounded by the blueprints and schematics that had been the language of my life for over 40 years. My custom home design firm, which I had built from a single drafting table in my sunroom, was finally enjoying its quiet, prosperous autumn. The text appeared in the family group chat, a little digital square of cruelty amidst the heart emojis and TGIF messages. It was from my younger brother, Michael. "Don't come to the barbecue this weekend." Just like that. No explanation. No softening. Beneath it, his new wife, Chloe, had added, "Sorry, Elle, but you always bring such a heavy energy. We just want to keep it light this year." My parents, God love them, responded with laughing face emojis. My mother typed, "You kids are too much," as if it were a hilarious inside joke I simply wasn't in on. My fingers, which could draft the complex, load-bearing structure of a 5,000 square foot home without a tremor, felt numb and clumsy over the screen. A lifetime of being the responsible one, the steady one, the one they all called for loans and advice but never for fun, rose in my throat like bile. I didn't plead. I didn't ask what I had done wrong. I typed a single, sterile word. Understood. I am Eleanor Vance. At 68, I am the founder and principal of Vance Architectural Designs, a firm responsible for some of the most sought-after residential properties in the state. The contract spread across my desk that evening represented commissions that could have purchased my parents' entire suburban development, not once, but several times over. And yet, to them, I was still just Eleanor, the frumpy, older sister who was a little too serious, a little too intense, and who probably needed a man to manage her finances. They had no idea the financial fortress I had built for myself, stone by stone. When people show you that you are not wanted, you have two choices. You can wither, or you can fortify. I have always been a builder. I placed the phone face down on the polished walnut. The soft click, a period at the end of their sentence. I let the silence of my study, a room I had designed for its perfect acoustics and north-facing light, settle around me. It was a silence of my own making, dignified and strong. I picked up my fountain pen, a heavy, elegant instrument, and went back to signing the documents. The scratch of the nib was the only sound, a reaffirmation of my own reality, a world away from their petty exclusion. The next morning, Saturday, the sun was already high over the lake behind my house. I was in my garden, the rich soil under my nails a grounding contrast to the digital ghosting of the night before, when my business line rang. It was Sarah, my office manager. Her voice was a mixture of amusement and concern. "Eleanor, there's a couple downstairs. They're quite insistent on speaking with the principal about a legacy-level home project. They won't give a name. Just say it's urgent." A quiet intuition, a cold little trickle, slid down my spine. Send them up, Sarah. The elevator ride to my private top-floor office takes precisely 45 seconds. I use that time to straighten a stack of renderings and look out the wall of glass toward the distant, hazy outline of the city. The doors slid open with a hushed whisper, and there they stood, Michael and Chloe. My brother, looking uncomfortable in a stiff new polo shirt, his eyes darting everywhere but at me, and Chloe, in a shockingly bright pink sheath dress and oversized sunglasses perched on her head, as if she'd just come from a paparazzi shoot. For a full 5 seconds, nobody moved. The air left the room. Chloe's mouth formed a perfect, silent O. Her designer sunglasses slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the polished concrete floor, the sound echoing sharply in the vast, open space. Eleanor? Michael finally choked out. His gaze swept from my face to the brushed steel Eleanor Vance principal plaque on my desk to the panoramic view of the lake that was my daily backdrop. You work here? This was the moment the first foundation of their world began to crack. The look on their faces was not one of pride or happy surprise. It was sheer, unadulterated shock, tinged with something else, something that looked an awful lot like avarice. Chloe recovered first, her shock melting into a brilliant, predatory smile. She strode forward, the click of her heels a declaration of war, and dropped a thick, glossy binder on my desk. "Oh my God, Ellie, this is perfect," she squealed, as if we were the dearest of friends. "We're here to commission our dream home, a real showpiece. We need the best, and now we find out you're literally the best. It's fate. You can design it for us as a family favor." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "We've already got the land. We just need the vision. Your vision." I didn't touch the binder. I looked from her eager, calculating face to my brother's guilty, hopeful one. "You came to my place of business without an appointment on a holiday weekend to ask me to design your multi-million-dollar dream home as a favor?" Michael finally found his voice, stepping forward. "Come on, Elle. Blood is thicker than water, right? This is our big chance." The hypocrisy was so vast, so breathtaking, it stole my breath for a moment. Just last night, blood was so thin it couldn't even get me an invitation to a backyard barbecue. I let the silence stretch, watching their smiles begin to falter under its weight. This was no longer about a BBQ. This was about the price of my dignity, and the bill was about to come due. The real question wasn't about the house they wanted me to build for them. It was about the house of cards they had already built for themselves, and how easily a single truth could send it all crashing down. And I was holding that truth in my hands, waiting for the right moment to let it go. The silence in my office was thicker than the marble on my floor. Michael's question, You work here?" hung in the air, a testament to the vast chasm of misunderstanding between us. Chloe's recovery was a masterclass in audacity. Her shock evaporated, replaced by a gleam of pure, unadulterated opportunity. She didn't just see her sister-in-law, she saw a resource that had fallen, unbidden, into her lap. "Michael, sweetie, don't be dense," she said, her voice a silken purr as she patted his arm, her eyes never leaving mine. "She doesn't just work here, she owns it." She turned that brilliant, predatory smile back to me. "This is better than fate, Ellie. It's divine intervention. We have this gorgeous, raw piece of land out by the lake. You know the one, with the old oaks. We need a legacy home, something that will be in our family for generations. And who better to design it than family?" I let her words settle. I watched my brother, my own flesh and blood, shift his weight from one foot to another, his gaze dropping to the floor. He was embarrassed, but not by their intrusion. He was embarrassed by my silence, by my lack of immediate, grateful acquiescence. The memory of his text, "Don't come to the BBQ," was a fresh brand on my heart.
"You have land," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth she so clearly expected. "And you have a vision. What you don't have is an appointment or, I assume, a budget for a legacy home designed by this firm." Chloe's facade finally fractured. "Oh, Ellie, don't be so clinical. This is about family helping family. You know how hard Michael has worked. This is his dream." She leaned forward, conspiratorially. "We were going to go with Harrison and Sons, but their fees are just exorbitant. But with you, we know you'll treat us right." The insult was so beautifully, expertly packaged, they had chosen me as a discount alternative. The second foundation stone of my patience began to crack. I thought of the contracts I'd signed last night, the sheer scale of my professional life that was so utterly invisible to them. They saw a lonely older woman with a successful hobby, not a titan of industry. "Michael," I said, turning my focus to my brother, forcing him to meet my eyes, "is this your dream? A multi-million-dollar custom home on the lake?" He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. His voice lacked conviction. It was the tone of a man reciting lines he'd been fed. "Yeah, Elle, it is. Chloe's really got it all planned out. It's going to be amazing." I nodded slowly, a plan beginning to crystallize in my mind, cold and sharp. "I see. Well, a project of that scale requires more than a casual Saturday morning discussion. It requires full financial disclosure, liquidity statements, loan pre-approvals, a full portfolio of your assets and liabilities." I let the corporate jargon land, watching their faces blanken. "My firm has a rigorous vetting process. We don't just build houses for anyone who walks in off the street." Chloe's facade finally fractured. "Financial disclosure? Eleanor, we're family. This is ridiculous." "Precisely because we are family, the lines must be clearer, not blurrier. I need to see everything. Your credit scores, your outstanding debts, everything. Then, and only then, can I even consider taking this to my design board." The color drained from Michael's face. It was a tell I remembered from our childhood, whenever he was caught in a lie. Chloe, however, rallied. She straightened her spine, her eyes flashing with the venom I knew had been simmering beneath the surface all along. "Fine," she snapped, grabbing her glossy binder from my desk. "If that's how you want to be, we'll take our business elsewhere. But don't think you'll be welcome at any family functions after this. Mom and Dad will be so disappointed in you." It was her trump card, the one she'd played so effectively the night before. I simply gestured toward the elevator. "The documents can be emailed to Sarah. She'll handle the initial review." They left then, a storm of muttered indignation and stiff-backed pride. The glass doors slid shut, sealing me back into my sanctuary of quiet power, but the peace was short-lived. My personal phone, still lying face down on the desk, began to vibrate. Then again, and again. I didn't need to look to know it was our mother. The guilt-tripping had begun. I could picture the text messages, full of wounded disappointment and pleas for family harmony. They thought they were applying pressure, but they were only adding fuel to a fire they didn't yet know was burning.
An hour later, as I was reviewing a set of engineering schematics, a different kind of notification appeared on my screen. It was an alert from my bank, an institution I'd used for 30 years. Application received, joint line of credit. My blood ran cold. The primary applicants? Michael and Chloe Vance. The requested amount? $750,000. And listed as a cosigner? Eleanor Vance. They hadn't just asked for a family discount. They had tried to commit fraud in my name. They'd used my social security number, which they must have gotten from my parents' old files, and my income, which was a matter of public record in certain business filings. The bank system had flagged it for verification due to the large amount, but it was already in the soft approval stage. The audacity was breathtaking. The betrayal, however, was a familiar, dull ache. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Charles, it's Eleanor. There's a fraudulent line of credit application at the bank. I need you to kill it, immediately." Charles, my private banker for 2 decades, asked no questions. The application was dead within 60 seconds. I instructed him to place a hard fraud alert on my entire profile and freeze any further activity. As the confirmation email popped into my inbox, I felt a strange, grim sense of clarity. The BBQ text hadn't been a simple slight. It was a symptom of a much deeper sickness. They saw me not as a person, but as a utility. And when one utility was denied, they had simply, and criminally, tried to tap into another. This was no longer about a party I wasn't invited to. This was a declaration of war, fought with the only weapons they understood: entitlement and deceit. And I was only just beginning to load my own arsenal. The real question wasn't what they would do next. It was how far I was willing to go to protect the life I had built from the family that was so determined to tear it down.
The confirmation email from Charles glowed on my screen. Application LC848821, permanently denied. Fraud alert active. A simple, sterile line of text that felt more powerful than any shouted argument. They had overplayed their hand. Trying to steal $750,000 was a different league from simply being rude. This was a line crossed, one that changed the entire landscape of our conflict. The quiet of my office was no longer peaceful. It was the calm before a storm I now knew I would have to unleash. My personal phone continued to buzz, a persistent, angry insect on the desk. I finally flipped it over. Not just my mother, my father, too. Their messages were a symphony of familial pressure. "Eleanor, Michael is heartbroken. How could you be so cold to your only brother? Your mother is crying. Is this what your success has done to you? Made you too proud for family?" They had already tried and convicted me based on Michael and Chloe's carefully edited version of the truth. The fact that their golden child had just attempted to commit a felony in my name was a detail they would never hear. Not yet. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a different app, the one connected to the security system of a property I hadn't personally visited in over a year, the charming 3-bedroom cottage in Oak Grove where Michael and Chloe lived. I'd bought it for him 5 years ago when his freelance graphic design business was floundering, a silent gift so he wouldn't feel the stress of rent. The deed, the mortgage, the taxes, everything was still solely in my name. It had been an act of love, a big sister helping her little brother find his footing. Now I saw it for what it had become, a nest of entitlement, a base of operations for their schemes. With a few taps, I revoked their digital access to the security system and turned off the automatic monthly mortgage payment that had been dutifully drafted from my account for 60 months. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft click of my keyboard as I composed an email to my real estate attorney, Martin Reynolds. "Martin, begin formal eviction proceedings for the Oak Grove property. 30-day notice. I'll forward you the details." The click of the send button was a sound of finality. The phone rang again. This time it was Michael's number. I watched it spin on the screen, a little digital plea for mercy. On the 5th ring, a cold curiosity made me answer. I said nothing. His voice was a ragged wire of panic. "Eleanor, what did you do? The bank just called. They said the line of credit was denied and flagged for fraud. They're talking about freezing our accounts." I remained silent, letting the weight of his own actions press down on him. "You did this, didn't you?" he accused, his voice rising. "You called them. How could you? We're family. We needed that money for the land." "You tried to steal $750,000 using my name, Michael. That isn't family. That is a felony." "It wasn't stealing," he shouted, the sound tinny and desperate through the speaker. It was a bridge loan. We were going to pay you back. Chloe said you'd never even notice." Chloe said. The words hung in the air. The pathetic refrain of a man who had surrendered his own moral compass. He was not the mastermind. He was the instrument. And he had just confirmed everything I suspected. "The conversation is over. You will be receiving a formal notice from my attorney. Do not contact me again."
unless it is through him. I ended the call and immediately blocked his number. The ensuing silence felt cleaner, as if I had surgically removed a source of infection. But I knew it wasn't over. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous, and Chloe was far more cunning than my brother. The next morning, Sunday, a thick, unmarked manila envelope was found leaning against my front door. There was no postmark, no return address, just my name typed in a plain, anonymous font. A chill, entirely separate from the morning air, crept down my spine. This was not from Michael. He lacked this kind of calculated, theatrical instinct. This was Chloe's move. I carried it inside to my kitchen island, the granite cool and unyielding under my palms. Using a steel letter opener, I sliced the top cleanly. A stack of papers, perhaps 20 pages thick, bound by a simple black clip, slid out. The cover page had no letterhead, just a single line of text. A truth you deserve to know. My heart hammered against my ribs. I began to read. It was a dossier on Chloe. Page 1 detailed a previous marriage, annulled after just 11 months. The man's name was David Chen. Pages 2 through 5 were photocopies of court documents from a lawsuit. David Chen had sued Chloe for fraud, claiming she had convinced him to empty his retirement account to invest in a can't-miss luxury pet accessory line that never materialized. The case was settled out of court, with David signing a strict NDA. Pages 6 through 10 were even more damning. Recent credit reports showing Chloe was drowning in nearly $150,000 of personal debt across multiple maxed-out credit cards, all opened in the last 18 months. The final page was a single, grainy photograph, taken from what looked like a long lens. It showed Chloe, just last week, getting into a very expensive, very familiar sports car, the same model owned by James Harrison, the lead architect at Harrison & Sons, the very firm she claimed had exorbitant fees. I sank onto a stool, the papers trembling in my hands. This wasn't just a gold digger. This was a predator, a serial financial and emotional manipulator. My brother wasn't just making poor choices. He was being systematically bled dry by a con artist. And someone who knew exactly how to find this information and how to deliver it to me anonymously, was trying to warn me. Or, more likely, was arming me. The sender's identity was a mystery, but the message was crystal clear. The battle for my brother's future was far bigger than I had imagined, and the enemy was already inside the gates. The barbecue texts, the office ambush, the fraudulent loan, they were all just opening moves in a much darker game. I looked at the photograph of Chloe and James Harrison again. A new, terrifying question formed in my mind. Was my brother's dream home even meant for him? Or was it merely the next score in a long, calculated con, and I was the final, reluctant bank he was supposed to rob? The stakes had just been raised from family drama to something far more sinister, and the anonymous envelope in my hands was the only map I had through the coming darkness. The anonymous dossier felt like a live wire in my hands, humming with dangerous truths. I spread the pages across my kitchen island, the granite cold and unyielding beneath them. Chloe's entire history of deception was laid out before me like a sinister roadmap. The previous marriage, the lawsuit, the crippling debt, it all painted a picture of a woman who saw relationships as transactions and people as stepping stones. But that final photograph, the one of her with James Harrison, was the key that unlocked a deeper, more terrifying chamber of this maze. James Harrison. His firm was my biggest competitor, a fact Chloe knew perfectly well. Their meeting wasn't a coincidence. It was a strategy. Were they working together? Was the entire dream home project a convoluted scheme to funnel my money through my own brother into Harrison's pocket? The thought was so audacious it took my breath away. My own family had become a weapon being wielded against me. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet.
These documents were obtained illegally, and without knowing their source, I couldn't trust their admissibility. I couldn't confront Michael. He was too deep under her spell. He would only see it as another attack, another example of his jealous older sister trying to ruin his happiness. No. I needed to understand the full scope of the trap before I could spring it. My first call was to a private investigator I had used years ago during a sensitive corporate espionage case. "Arthur, it's Eleanor Vance. I need you to look into 2 people for me, discreetly and quickly." I gave him the names of Chloe Vance and James Harrison. I need to know the nature of their connection, financial, professional, personal, everything. Next, I did something I should have done years ago. I logged into the county's online property portal and pulled the full deed and tax history for the Oak Grove cottage. The screen confirmed what I already knew. I was the sole owner. But then I noticed something I hadn't before. A recent permit application had been filed, not in my name, but in Michael's. A permit for major structural renovations and a second-story addition. Estimated cost $400,000. He had filed this without my knowledge or consent, using my property as collateral for a vision that wasn't his. The arrogance was staggering. The permit was still pending approval, held up, I suspected, by the lack of a contractor's seal. A contractor who would undoubtedly be Harrison & Sons. The pieces were snapping into place with a chilling clarity. They weren't just asking me to design a house. They were trying to use my ownership of their current home to finance a new one designed by my competitor, likely with kickbacks flowing back to Chloe. It was a Russian nesting doll of deceit, each layer more rotten than the last. My phone lit up with a notification from my home security system. Motion detected at the Oak Grove property. I pulled up the live feed. It was Michael and Chloe, standing on the front porch, arguing. Their body language was sharp, frantic. He was gesticulating wildly. She had her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold fury. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The bank's rejection and the halted mortgage payments had sent them into a panic. Their carefully constructed house of cards was trembling. Then I saw him. A third figure approached from the driveway, tall, dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking overcoat, James Harrison. He joined them on the porch, and the dynamic shifted immediately. Chloe's anger melted into a placating smile. Michael looked defeated, shoulders slumped. Harrison put a hand on Michael's shoulder, a gesture that was probably meant to be reassuring, but looked like a claim of ownership. They were all there, standing on my property, plotting their next move against me. The audacity was a physical blow. I watched as Harrison handed Michael a rolled-up set of architectural plans. My blood ran cold. They weren't just talking about a dream. They were already deep in the execution phase. They had to be stopped, not just for my sake, but for Michael's. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand, about to lose everything. Just as the trio on my screen moved to go inside, another car, a nondescript sedan, pulled up to the curb. A man got out, and my breath hitched. It was Arthur, my investigator. He stood by his car, pretending to be on a phone call, his camera discreetly capturing the entire scene. Michael, Chloe, and James Harrison, together on my property with a set of building plans. He had gotten there in under an hour. The man was a ghost, and worth every penny.
He texted me a moment later, confirming subjects at the location. The man is definitively James Harrison of Harrison & Sons. Interesting company he keeps. I typed back, my fingers trembling with a volatile mix of fury and grim satisfaction. Get me everything you can on their connection. Financial records, shared accounts, everything. Already on it, he replied. I ended the feed. The image of their conspiratorial huddle burned into my mind. The anonymous dossier, the fraudulent loan, the unauthorized permit, and now this clandestine meeting. It was all connected. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a coordinated financial assault. I walked to my study and opened the safe, pulling out a small, fireproof lockbox. Inside were the only sentimental items I kept: old family photographs. I found one of Michael and me as children, building a fort in the backyard. His face was smudged with dirt, his smile genuine and full of light. What happened to that boy? When did he become so willing to be a puppet for a woman who was systematically dismantling his life? A new, more painful truth was dawning on me. Saving him wouldn't be as simple as exposing Chloe. I would have to break him first. I would have to show him the depth of his own gullibility and the cruelty of the woman he called his wife. It would be a brutal, heart-shattering process. He might never forgive me for it. But the alternative, watching him be bled dry, used, and discarded, was unthinkable. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived, and I was standing at its center, holding the lightning rod. The next move was mine, and it would have to be a checkmate. There would be no recovery from this for any of us. The family we had been was already gone, and the reckoning that was coming would scorch the earth where it once stood.
Arthur's first report arrived in the dead of night, a PDF that landed in my encrypted inbox with a soft chime that echoed in the silence of my study. I opened it, the blue light of the monitor washing over the pages of damning evidence. The connection between Chloe and James Harrison was far deeper and far more intimate than I had ever imagined. They weren't just acquaintances or business partners. According to bank records Arthur had acquired, James Harrison had been funneling substantial monthly payments into a shell corporation registered to Chloe's maiden name for over a year. The memo lines on the transfers were labeled consulting fees, but the amounts, $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000 a month, were far beyond standard consulting rates. It was a payoff, a retainer. The plot crystallized with terrifying clarity. Harrison wasn't just designing a house for them. He was using Chloe as an inside agent. Her mission? To gain access to my designs, my client list, my proprietary structural methodologies. The dream home was a smokescreen. The real target was my company, Vance Architectural Designs. They were planning corporate espionage using my own brother as the unwitting Trojan horse. The sheer calculated brilliance of it was almost admirable. And the risk they had taken, the sheer audacity of thinking they could get away with it, told me one thing. They were desperate. Harrison and Sons must be in serious financial trouble. The next morning, a Monday, the formal 30-day notice to vacate was delivered by a process server to the Oak Grove cottage. My attorney, Martin, called me immediately after. Martin, Chloe answered the door. She was theatrical. She screamed something about you being a monster and signed the paper with a flourish. I have the confirmation. Good, I said, my voice steady. Proceed as discussed. An hour later, my personal line buzzed. It was my mother. This time I answered. The wailing began before I could even say hello. Eleanor, how could you? An eviction notice. Your own brother. He's your flesh and blood. We raised you better than this. I let her cry, let the torrent of guilt and accusation wash over me. When she paused for breath, I spoke, my voice quiet but firm. Mother, did Michael tell you he applied for a $750,000 line of credit using my name and social security number without my permission? The silence on the other end was sudden and absolute. I could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt in her mind. What? No, he wouldn't. He said you were being difficult about the house plans. I said, he committed felony fraud. And the woman you so adore, Chloe, is at the center of it. I have proof. Do you want to see it? Or do you want to keep calling me, blaming me for protecting myself from a criminal? She stammered, a broken, confused sound. I don't understand. You don't have to understand, I said, a profound weariness settling in my bones. You just have to believe that the daughter you raised is not a monster,
and you need to ask yourself why your son is lying to you." I ended the call. The seed of doubt was planted. It was a start. The following hours were a blur of strategic action. I instructed my IT team to create a digital honeypot, a secure server filled with fake but highly convincing architectural plans and client data for a fictitious multi-million-dollar project called the Airy. I made sure the files were tantalizingly accessible with the right credentials I knew Chloe, with her tech savvy, would be able to fish from a junior employee. I was laying a trap, baiting it with exactly what they wanted. Then, Arthur's second report came in. This one contained a single staggering piece of information. He had dug into the raw land by the lake that Chloe had so grandly described. It wasn't theirs. It was under contract by a holding company that traced back to James Harrison. He was planning to build his own spec house on it using my stolen designs and was using my brother and his wife as the patsies to get them. Arthur's first report arrived in the dead of night, a PDF that landed in my encrypted inbox with a soft chime that echoed in the silence of my study. I opened it, the blue light of the monitor washing over the pages of damning evidence. The connection between Chloe and James Harrison was far deeper and far more intimate than I had ever imagined. They weren't just acquaintances or business partners. According to bank records Arthur had acquired, James Harrison had been funneling substantial monthly payments into a shell corporation registered to Chloe's maiden name for over a year. The memo lines on the transfers were labeled consulting fees, but the amounts, $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000 a month, were far beyond standard consulting rates. It was a payoff, a retainer. The plot crystallized with terrifying clarity. Harrison wasn't just designing a house for them, he was using Chloe as an inside agent. Her mission? To gain access to my designs, my client list, my proprietary structural methodologies. The dream home was a smokescreen. The real target was my company, Vance Architectural Designs. They were planning corporate espionage, using my own brother as the unwitting Trojan horse. The sheer calculated brilliance of it was almost admirable. And the risk they had taken, the sheer audacity of thinking they could get away with it, told me one thing. They were desperate. Harrison and Sons must be in serious financial trouble. The next morning, a Monday, the formal 30-day notice to vacate was delivered by a process server to the Oak Grove cottage. My attorney, Martin, called me immediately after. "Martin, Chloe answered the door. She was theatrical. She screamed something about you being a monster and signed the paper with a flourish. I have the confirmation." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Proceed as discussed." An hour later, my personal line buzzed. It was my mother. This time I answered. The wailing began before I could even say hello. "Eleanor, how could you? An eviction notice. Your own brother. He's your flesh and blood. We raised you better than this." I let her cry, let the torrent of guilt and accusation wash over me. When she paused for breath, I spoke, my voice quiet but firm. "Mother, did Michael tell you he applied for a $750,000 line of credit using my name and social security number without my permission?" The silence on the other end was sudden and absolute. I could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt in her mind. "What? No, he wouldn't. He said you were being difficult about the house plans." I said, "He committed felony fraud. And the woman you so adore, Chloe, is at the center of it. I have proof. Do you want to see it? Or do you want to keep calling me, blaming me for protecting myself from a criminal?" She stammered, a broken, confused sound. I don't understand. You don't have to understand, I said, a profound weariness settling in my bones. You just have to believe that the daughter you raised is not a monster, and you need to ask yourself why your son is lying to you. I ended the call. The seed of doubt was planted. It was a start. The following hours were a blur of strategic action. I instructed my IT team to create a digital honeypot, a secure server filled with fake but highly convincing architectural plans and client data for a fictitious multi-million-dollar project called the Airy. I made sure the files were tantalizingly accessible with the right credentials I knew Chloe, with her tech savvy, would be able to fish from a junior employee. I was laying a trap, baiting it with exactly what they wanted. Then, Arthur's second report came in. This one contained a single staggering piece of information. He had dug into the raw land by the lake that Chloe had so grandly described. It wasn't theirs. It was under contract by a holding company that traced back to James Harrison. He was planning to build his own spec house on it using my stolen designs and was using my brother and his wife as the patsies to get them.
The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a sickening thud. They never intended for Michael to live in any dream home. They were using his connection to me to steal my intellectual property, which Harrison would then use to build and sell a luxury home, saving himself hundreds of thousands in design fees and potentially landing a multi-million-dollar sale. Michael and Chloe would be left with nothing but the debt they had accrued in my name, and I would be left with the ruined reputation and stolen trade secrets. The betrayal was so complete, so cold-blooded, it stole the air from my lungs. This was no longer just about money or family drama. This was about survival. My company was my life's work, my legacy. I had built it from nothing with my own two hands and a fierce, unyielding mind. I would not let them take it from me. That evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across my perfectly manicured lawn, I made a decision. The passive gathering of evidence was over. It was time to go on the offensive. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. It was time to bring in someone who understood the kind of war this was about to become, someone who operated in the shadows I was only just learning to navigate. The chessboard was set, the players were in position, and I was done letting them make the moves. The next move would be mine, and it would be a declaration of war they would not see coming. The quiet, older sister was done being quiet.
The number I dialed belonged to a man named Julian Croft. We had crossed paths years ago during a hostile takeover attempt of a firm I was consulting for. He was not a lawyer, not exactly a detective, but something in between. A resolver of impossible situations for people who could afford his staggering fees. He operated in the gray areas where the law was too slow and conventional justice was a naive concept. I had never needed his particular skill set before, but now I needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low, calm baritone that held no trace of surprise. Eleanor Vance, I wondered when our paths would cross again. Julian, I have a situation. Corporate espionage, identity fraud, and a family member being used as an unwitting pawn. The opposition is connected and motivated. Send me what you have, he said. No further questions needed. I'll be on a plane tonight. I compiled everything: Arthur's reports, the bank fraud alert, the unauthorized permit, the security footage of the meeting on my porch, and the digital trail of the honeypot server. I sent it in an encrypted file. Within an hour, he replied, "The trap is elegant. Let's give them the rope. I'll handle the rest." A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. The professional was in charge.
The next 48 hours were a study in suspended animation. I went through the motions at work, reviewing projects, meeting with clients, but my mind was elsewhere, waiting for the signal. Julian worked silently, a ghost in the machine of my enemies' lives. The first sign of movement came from my honeypot server. An alert flashed on my screen, unauthorized access from an IP address registered to a cafe near James Harrison's office. They had taken the bait. Chloe had successfully phished the fake credentials, and someone at Harrison & Sons was now downloading the fictitious Airy plans. I watched the progress bar fill with a cold sense of satisfaction. They now possessed stolen intellectual property that was completely worthless. But they didn't know that. Julian's first update came later that evening. Harrison is leveraged to the hilt, personal guarantees on several failing projects. He needs a win, and he needs it yesterday. The Airy plans are his Hail Mary. He's already contacted a potential buyer, a Russian oligarch with a penchant for dramatic cliffside homes, presenting it as his own original design. The audacity was breathtaking. He was selling my fake designs before he even had them fully downloaded. The meeting with the buyer is set for Friday at Harrison's office. I've ensured the oligarch's assistant is one of my associates. We'll have full audio and video. This was happening faster than I had anticipated. The greed was making them reckless. On Thursday, the storm I had been waiting for finally hit my doorstep. Not with a phone call or a text, but in person. I returned home from a late meeting to find Michael standing on my porch, illuminated by the sensor light. He looked haggard, his clothes rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed. He'd been crying. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raw, "please, we need to talk." I didn't invite him in. I stood on the other side of the threshold, the locked screen door between us. "You have 30 seconds. It's Chloe. She's gone. She cleaned out our joint account, took her things. She left a note." He fumbled in his pocket and held up a crumpled piece of paper. I could see the sharp, angular handwriting from where I stood. "This wasn't the life I signed up for. Don't try to find me." The pawn had been sacrificed. Harrison must have realized the eviction and the fraud alerts were making Michael a liability. With the Airy plan seemingly in hand, Chloe was no longer needed to manipulate my brother. She had been extracted from the equation, likely with a handsome bonus from Harrison for her services. They had discarded my brother like yesterday's trash. A part of me, the big sister who remembered building forts, ached for him. But a larger, harder part remembered the fraudulent loan, the stolen identity, the willing participation in my ruin. "I'm sorry that happened to you, Michael," I said, and I meant it. "But you came to my office. You stood by while she asked me for a multi-million-dollar favor after disinviting me from a family barbecue. You let her use my name to try and steal from a bank. Your problem started long before she left."
He sank to his knees on my porch, his body racked with sobs. I didn't know about the loan. I swear she said it was just a formality. She said you owed us." "Get up, Michael," I said, my voice tired. "You're not a victim. You were a volunteer. The notice to vacate still stands. You have 27 days. I closed the solid oak door, locking it with a definitive thud. I leaned against it, listening to his broken weeping on the other side. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. But mercy, in this case, would have been a slower, more cruel form of poison. He needed to hit the bottom. It was the only way he would ever have a chance to look up and see the truth. My phone vibrated. A text from Julian. "The pieces are in motion. The meeting is confirmed for 10 a.m. tomorrow. The finale is set. Be ready." I looked at the door, behind which my broken brother was sobbing. The finale was indeed set, but it wasn't the one he was expecting. Tomorrow, the entire carefully constructed world of James, Harrison, and Chloe would come crashing down, and the shock waves would wash away what little was left of my brother's illusions. The hard way was the only way left, and I was the one who had to ensure there was no escape from it.
The silence on my porch stretched into the night. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't call security. I simply stood there, listening to the ragged sounds of my brother's world disintegrating on my doorstep. The part of me that had changed his diapers and helped him with his algebra homework screamed to open the door, to offer comfort. But the woman who had built an empire from nothing, the woman who had just been targeted for corporate destruction, held firm. Some fires must burn themselves out before anything new can grow. Eventually, the sounds faded. I heard his car door slam, the engine start, and the tires crunch slowly over the gravel as he drove away into the darkness. The ache in my chest was a physical thing, a hollowed-out space where family trust used to live. My phone buzzed on the hall table. Julian. Harrison is moving up the timeline. The meeting with the buyer is now in 1 hour. He's spooked. My contact says he's packing documents and wiring funds. He knows something is wrong. An hour. The trap was about to be sprung, and the prey was getting nervous. I typed a quick reply. Proceed. There was nothing for me to do but wait. I poured a single measure of bourbon, the good stuff I saved for celebrating completed projects, and carried it to my study. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the leather chair behind my desk, the same desk where I had first faced Michael and Chloe's audacious request, and stared out at the city lights glittering in the distance. My city, my legacy. At exactly 10:03 a.m., my computer chimed with an incoming secure video feed. It was live from Harrison's conference room. Julian's associate, a woman posing as the oligarch's assistant, had her camera active. I watched, my drink forgotten in my hand. James Harrison looked like a man on the verge of a coronary. His face was flushed, his collar too tight. He was enthusiastically presenting the airy plans on a large screen, pointing out the revolutionary structural elements that were in fact the deliberate flaws my team had baked into the fake designs. The cantilevered master suite is an engineering marvel, Harrison was saying, sweat beading on his forehead. Absolutely unprecedented. At that moment, the conference room door opened. Julian Croft walked in, followed by 2 men in dark suits. He wasn't a large man, but his presence sucked the air from the room. Harrison froze, his pointer stick clattering to the floor. James Harrison, Julian said, his voice calm and carrying, perfectly audible through the feed. My name is Julian Croft. I represent Eleanor Vance of Vance Architectural Designs. This is a civil complaint detailing counts of corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit fraud, and misappropriation of trade secrets. The designs you are currently attempting to sell are the intellectual property of Ms. Vance. Harrison's face went from flushed to ashen. I don't know what you're... Julian held up a hand. He then looked directly at the hidden camera. We also have a signed affidavit from Chloe Vance detailing your financial arrangement and her role in the attempted theft. This was a bluff, a masterful one, but Harrison didn't know that. The last of the color drained from his face. He knew he was looking at financial and professional ruin. But Julian wasn't finished. He turned to the two men. "These gentlemen are from the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division. They're very interested in the digital trail leading from Ms. Vance's secured servers to your personal laptop." The scene descended into chaos. Harrison was read his rights. His computer was seized. The oligarch's assistant calmly gathered her things and left. I watched until the feed went black. The final image burned into my mind. James Harrison, a broken man in a $5,000 suit, being led away by federal agents. It was over. The threat to my company was neutralized. The architect of this entire scheme was facing consequences that would end his career and likely send him to prison. My personal phone lit up. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother, then my aunt. The family grapevine was buzzing, but the news they were hearing was undoubtedly a garbled, sympathetic version centered on Michael's heartbreak. They didn't know about the FBI, the espionage, the near destruction of my life's work. They only knew that Chloe had left and I had thrown Michael out.
I finished my bourbon, the warmth doing little to ease the cold knot in my stomach. I had won. I had protected what was mine with ruthless efficiency, but the victory felt hollow, tasted of ash. I had just orchestrated the utter destruction of several lives, and in the process, I had likely incinerated the last fragile bridge to my only brother. The war was over. The battlefield was silent, and I was left alone, the queen of a kingdom I had defended with everything I had, wondering if the price of this particular victory was a piece of my own soul. The hardest part was yet to come, learning to live with the silence I had fought so hard to create. The fallout from this explosion was only just beginning, and I was standing directly at its epicenter. The silence in my study was absolute. The video feed had gone dark, leaving only the reflection of my own face in the black screen, a pale, composed mask that betrayed none of the turmoil churning beneath. I had won. I had protected my company, my reputation, my very livelihood. So why did I feel like I had swallowed broken glass? The calls continued. My parents, my aunts, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. The family mobilization was in full force, a symphony of concern orchestrated around Michael, the perceived victim. They didn't know about Harrison's arrest. They didn't know about the FBI. Their world was small, defined by hurt feelings and family loyalty. And in that world, I was the villain who had evicted a heartbroken man. I didn't answer. I had no words for them that wouldn't be laced with a bitterness that would only confirm their narrative. Let them think what they wanted. The truth was a fortress they had never bothered to storm. 2 days later, a different kind of call came. It was from the Oak Grove Police Department. A neighbor had reported signs of a break-in at the cottage. My first gut-wrenching thought was of Michael. Had he done something desperate? I called the property manager and had him meet the officers there. The report that came back was not what I expected. It wasn't a break-in. It was a ransacking. Chloe, before her disappearance, had returned. She had taken everything of value she could carry, electronics, jewelry Michael had inherited from our grandmother, even the small, expensive appliances. She had also guessed, in a fit of petty vengeance, keyed the beautiful hardwood floors and spray-painted the word bitch across the living room wall in crimson paint. The damage was a declaration. This was her final, scorched earth farewell. The property manager sent photos. I stared at the image of the vandalized wall, the words screaming from the serene butter yellow paint I had chosen myself. This was the woman my family had embraced. This was the real partner they believed was so good for my brother. The evidence of her true nature was literally written on the walls. And still, they would find a way to blame me for provoking her. A week after Harrison's arrest, a formal notice arrived from his law firm. They were folding. The scandal had triggered clauses with their creditors and investors. The company was collapsing under the weight of its own debt and now very public disgrace. The news made the business section of the paper. I read the article with no sense of triumph, only a cold, quiet acknowledgement. A predator had been put down. It was a necessary act, not a celebratory one. It was then that I made the decision to see the cottage for myself. I drove there on a gray, drizzly afternoon, the kind of day that matched the mood settling over my life. I used my key, the one I'd never given back, and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the smell of cheap perfume and spite. Seeing the damage in person was different from the photos. The gouges in the floor were deep and violent. The spray paint was an ugly, bleeding wound on the wall. But it was the emptiness that struck me hardest. The ghost of the life I had tried to give my brother was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell of greed and anger. In the center of the living room, amidst the debris, was a single framed photograph lying face down. I picked it up. It was a picture of Michael and me, taken on his graduation day. My arm was around him, both of us smiling, squinting in the sun. We looked happy. We looked like family. I turned it over and saw she had scrawled on the back in the same red paint, "You did this." And perhaps, in a way, I had. I had created a situation where the poison had to be cut out, no matter how much it bled. By refusing to be a victim, by fighting back with every tool at my disposal, I had forced the disease to its violent, ugly conclusion. I placed the photograph in my bag. I would keep it, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a reminder of what had once been worth fighting for. As I was locking the door, a car pulled into the driveway. It was my father's old sedan. He got out slowly, his shoulders stooped, his face etched with a weariness I had never seen before. He didn't approach the house, just stood by his car, looking at me across the damp lawn.
I walked toward him. We stood there in the misting rain, two strangers bound by blood and broken history. "Your mother, she's not well," he said, his voice rough. It's been a lot." "I know," I said. He looked past me at the house. "He's staying with us. He doesn't get out of bed most days." He finally met my eyes. "Was it worth it, Eleanor? Was all of this destruction worth it?" I thought of the fraudulent loan, the stolen designs, the dossier on Chloe, the conference room where Harrison was arrested. I thought of the words sprayed on the wall and the photograph in my bag. "It wasn't about worth, Dad," I said softly. "It was about survival. They weren't just asking for a handout. They were trying to burn my entire life to the ground. I just decided not to provide the fuel." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't understanding, not quite. It was the first faint dawning of a terrible, reluctant belief. He gave a slow, heavy nod, got back in his car, and drove away. I was left standing alone in the rain. The battle was over, the enemies were vanquished, but the landscape was forever changed. I had my victory, I had my peace, and I was just beginning to understand the profound, echoing loneliness that came with it. The cost of freedom is paid in the currency of connection, and my account was now bankrupt. The final reckoning was not with them, but with myself, and the life I would have to build from the ashes. The rain fell in a soft, steady drizzle, soaking through my coat as I watched my father's taillights disappear down the street. His question echoed in the silence he left behind. Was it worth it? There was no answer that could bridge the chasm between his world and mine. He lived in a universe of family dinners and hurt feelings, while I had just navigated a war of corporate espionage and felony fraud. I returned to my car, the photograph of Michael and me feeling like a lead weight in my bag. I didn't drive home. Instead, I found myself navigating the familiar streets toward my parents' neighborhood, the one they were now supposedly selling. I parked across the street from their modest two-story home. The porch light was on, a lonely beacon in the gloomy afternoon. I saw a shadow move past the living room window. My mother. Her posture was slumped, a physical manifestation of the grief that had settled over their household. This was the collateral damage. This was the cost of my survival. My parents, innocent in their blindness, were now collateral damage in a war they never knew was being waged. Seeing my mother's silhouette, a fresh wave of anguish washed over me, so sharp it stole my breath. I had been so focused on the fight, on the strategic moves and countermoves, that I had shielded myself from the human wreckage I was creating in my wake. My phone buzzed. It was Arthur, the investigator. Final report. Chloe Vance was apprehended at JFK, attempting to board a flight to Buenos Aires. She was carrying $85,000 in cash and the jewelry reported stolen from the Oak Grove property. She's being held on charges of grand larceny and vandalism. She's already asking for a deal, offering to testify against Harrison. So, the final loose end was tied. The law was now handling what I had set in motion. There was no satisfaction, only a grim sense of closure. I started the car and drove away from my parents' house. I couldn't go inside. What would I say? That I was sorry for protecting myself? That I regretted stopping the people who tried to destroy me? The truth was a weapon that would only hurt them more. I spent the next week in a strange, suspended state. The office was quiet. The threats were gone. The silence I had craved was now my constant companion, and it was deafening. I found myself wandering the empty rooms of my own house, a structure I had designed for peace and solitude, now feeling more like a beautifully appointed tomb. A month passed. The foreclosure on the Oak Grove cottage was finalized. I didn't attend the sale. The bank emailed me the paperwork. The deficiency was waived. A clean financial break. The for sale sign went up in front of my parents' home. I saw the listing online. The photos showed a house frozen in time, filled with the artifacts of a family that no longer existed in the same way. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't from a lawyer or a bank. The handwriting on the envelope was my father's, shaky and uncertain. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Eleanor," it began, "your mother and I have moved into the apartment. It's small, but it's manageable. Michael is with us. He started seeing a therapist. It's slow going, but he doesn't talk much, but he's out of bed. I went through my old files in the move. I found something. I should have given it to you months ago, but I suppose I was afraid of what it meant." A smaller folded paper was tucked inside the letter. It was a photocopy of a bank statement from over a year ago. It was from an account in Michael's name, one I didn't recognize. The transactions were a series of large outgoing transfers to a numbered company. But it was the memo line that made my heart stop. On every single transfer, in Michael's own handwriting, was one word: investment. And then, at the bottom of my father's letter, was the final devastating sentence. "I found this 6 months ago. I thought it was for his business. I didn't know he was sending all his money to her. I didn't know she was stealing from him the whole time. I should have told you. I should have seen it. I'm sorry, Eleanor, for everything. I sank into a chair, the papers fluttering to the floor. The last piece of the puzzle. My brother hadn't just been a willing participant, he had been an active investor in his own destruction. He had been funding Chloe's life, her schemes, likely even the payments from Harrison, all under the illusion that he was building a future. He wasn't just a pawn, he was the bankroll. The betrayal was now complete, and it reached all the way to my father's quiet complicity. His silence, his unwillingness to confront what was in front of him, had allowed the cancer to spread. I looked around my silent, beautiful home. I had won. I had exposed every lie, defeated every enemy, and secured my kingdom. But the victory had cost me my family. The poison was cut out, but the patient had died on the table. I picked up the photograph from Michael's graduation. Our smiling, sun-squinting faces seemed like artifacts from another lifetime. The truth was indeed simpler, just as I had once thought. Protecting the family sometimes meant destroying it so that something new, something healthier, might one day have a chance to grow in the scorched earth. But as I sat alone in the gathering dusk, I couldn't help but wonder if the price of my peace was a lifetime of this deafening, hollow silence. The war was over. I was the sole survivor. And the burden of that survival was now mine to carry, alone. The finality of my father's letter settled into my bones, a cold, hard truth that left no room for doubt or hope. The story was complete. The villain was not just Chloe or Harrison, but a web of complicity and willful ignorance that had entangled my entire family. I had torn through that web with the brutal efficiency of a surgeon removing a necrotic limb. The operation was a success, but the patient was forever changed. I did not reply to my father's letter. What could I say? That I forgave him? I didn't, not yet. That I understood? In a way, I did, but the understanding was a clinical one, devoid of warmth. His apology was a start, but it couldn't rebuild what had been demolished. Some bridges, once burned, leave only a chasm too wide to cross. Winter came, draping the world in a blanket of white that mirrored the stillness in my heart. My work continued, the projects and clients a welcome distraction from the quiet of my personal life. I designed a library for a university, a community center for a struggling neighborhood, losing myself in blueprints and the pure, logical language of structure and form. It was in this work that I found a semblance of peace. I was building something, creating spaces for learning and community, even as my own family space lay in ruins. One afternoon in late February, my assistant, Sarah, buzzed my office. "Eleanor, there's a Mr. Whitaker here to see you." A Maverick Whitaker. He says it's personal. The name sent a jolt through me. Chloe's first husband? The man from the dossier. Why was he here? "Send him in," I said, my voice betraying none of my surprise. He was taller than I'd imagined from his photograph, with a quiet, weathered dignity. He held his coat in his hands, his gaze direct and unsettlingly calm. "Miss Vance," he said, nodding, "I won't take much of your time." "Mr. Whitaker, please, sit." He remained standing. "I heard what happened with Chloe and Harrison." He gave a small, grim shake of his head. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm not surprised." "Why are you here?" I asked, genuinely curious. "To thank you," he said, his words simple and stark. "And to tell you that you're not alone." He met my eyes, and in his I saw a reflection of my own exhaustion, my own hard-won survival. "She left a trail of wreckage. You were just the one strong enough and smart enough to finally stop her. Most people, they just get broken, like your brother.
like me for a long time. His acknowledgement was a balm I hadn't known I needed. Here was someone who understood the cost, who had paid a similar price. I lost everything to her. My house, my savings, my faith in people. It took me years to rebuild. It's a lonely road. He paused, looking out my window at the snowy landscape. I just wanted you to know that the loneliness, it lessens. Eventually. He turned to leave. "Mr. Whitaker," I called out. He glanced back. "Thank you." He gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod and was gone. His visit was a turning point. It didn't fix anything, but it shifted something inside me. I was not a monster. I was a survivor, and there were others who understood the language of survival. Spring began to thaw the frozen ground. I received a formal notice that my parents' house had sold. The family group chat, which I had long since muted, was finally deleted. It was a silent digital death that felt appropriate. On the first truly warm day of the year, I drove back to Oak Grove. The "for sale" sign was gone from the cottage. A new family was moving in. A young couple with a toddler who was chasing a butterfly across the lawn. They waved at me, their faces full of the hopeful energy of a new beginning. I waved back, a genuine if small smile touching my lips. The house was no longer a monument to betrayal. It was just a house again, sheltering a new story.
I drove away and found myself, almost without conscious thought, pulling into the parking lot of my parents' new apartment complex. I didn't go up. I just sat in the car, watching the building. After a while, my father came out to get the mail. He saw my car. He stopped. And for a long moment, we just looked at each other across the asphalt. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. But he didn't turn away either. He simply gave a slow, deep nod, an acknowledgement of my presence, of the unhealed wound between us, of the complicated, painful truth we now shared. Then he turned and went back inside. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was an armistice, a silent agreement that we existed in the same world, bearing the same scars. That night, I took the graduation photo of Michael and me from my desk drawer. I didn't put it in a frame. I placed it back in the drawer, but I didn't bury it at the bottom. I left it where I could see it, a reminder not of what was lost, but of what was. The good memories were real, even if the people in them were gone. The truth is, blood isn't thicker than water. Loyalty, respect, and truth are. And sometimes protecting the family you've built for yourself, your integrity, your peace, your legacy, means making choices that the family you were born into will never understand. The poison is gone. The bleeding has stopped. The scar remains, a permanent record of the battle. But I no longer feel the need to explain it or to apologize for it. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 68 years old. I survived. And for the first time in a very long time, as I look out at the sunset from the quiet, beautiful home I built with my own 2 hands, I believe that is enough.